Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to this Governors for Schools webinar. Hot Topics is actually the focus of this morning's webinar, but just before we start the session today, I've got the pleasure of being able to introduce Emily Stobart to you, who you can see on the screen at the moment. Emily is here just to give a very short message about the work that her organisation, the International Rescue Committee, does, which we and everybody at Governors for Schools thinks is a really important message to be able to share with school governors. So with no more ado, if you'll forgive me, there'll be a slight jiggling with the slides at the moment, but I'll hand you over to Emily.
Thank you, Steve, and good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you this morning. As Steve said, my name is Emily, and I work on behalf of the International Rescue Committee. So I'm going to take you through a project that we're working on for educators and for people who work with refugee and asylum-seeking children and young people in the community. But I thought this was a really good opportunity to offer some free training to the schools that you are working with, to yourselves if you haven't heard of our training before. All of our resources and all of our training is free. So it's a really good thing to recommend to your schools. So the Healing Classrooms and Healing Spaces project is working in the UK. It started in 2022, so it's a fairly new project for the IRC. But if you've heard of the International Rescue Committee, you will know that we've been around for a long time. Thank you. As you can see on the map, these are all of the countries that we work in. So there's two kind of facets to the IRC. They do crisis relief and development in countries, and then we do resettlement and integration. So that's the part of the team that I'm with, and I'm part of the education team in the UK. So we work with teachers and educators and community organizations to help them feel supported in how to support refugee and asylum-seeking children in their classroom. This project has been around since the 90s. It started in refugee camps in the Middle East and then has been adapted into countries like the US and in Germany, and is now being used in the UK. So as I said, it's a really popular program. We've reached over 2,500 educators since we started in 2022. And I have really positive feedback about these strategies and things that we recommend to put in place for refugee and asylum-seeking children to feel safe, welcome, and able to thrive in their new setting. Next slide, please. The Healing Classrooms and Healing Spaces approach is a three-pronged module. So it's a three-part training, two parts if you're doing the healing spaces, because you don't really need to focus on academic success. But I think for our talk today, I'll speak more about the Healing Classrooms project. So we do a 3-hour-and-a-half training session. Teachers and educators can sign up for whenever suits them, and they commit to the 3 sessions. And we look at preparing a safe place to land, so things that we can do in our classrooms to ensure that these children feel welcome and safe. We build a community for learning, so we look at how the families can be supported in a school, what schools can be doing to ensure that families are included in children's education. And then the third is fostering academic success. So we look at strategies, EAL strategies, if English isn't their first language, assessment techniques, and lots of signposting to some really good charities. Next slide, please. These are the courses that we offer. So we have the Healing Classrooms CPD, which is a little bit longer for teachers. It's a fully accredited course, which is great. It's a 5-module course. We talk a lot about toxic stress and trauma and how children who have gone through the refugee and asylum-seeking process could be coming into our schools with trauma, and how as teachers we can combat that and help them build resilience and be successful in their new classroom. And then we go on to building a safe place, building a community, and fostering academic success. We also, for teachers who have done the CPD course, if they want to take that further and kind of cascade that training, we offer a Train the Trainer course, so Healing Classrooms Champions, which has been really popular. We've just started that this year, and we have our first cohort who are delivering their own training, so they get access to all of the resources. They have a one-to-one session with us if they have any questions. So it's really nice to see schools kind of take this on board as a whole school approach. We can either do drop-in sessions, open sessions for teachers if like the EAL coordinator wants to come, or governors want to come, and they can attend the training, or we can do a whole day bespoke session if that's something that the school is interested in. If we are doing an in-person event, we do ask that our travel costs be covered, but it's pretty minimal. all of our team, there's 4 of us, we're all remote. So as long as we can get to the school, we just say that a donation would be nice for the program to continue. But other than that, the rest of the training is free. All of our resources are free, and every participant will get a 100-page handbook that has case studies, reflection tasks, and it goes through the program with them. So they get to take that away and they can remember the training that we had. The Healing Spaces is very similar to Healing Classrooms. It's only the 2 modules because it works with community organizations. So we've worked a lot with Galleries of Sanctuary. We've worked with some theater companies, which is really exciting. Some universities as well, and lots of volunteer organizations who help support refugee and asylum seeking children and young people up to 21. So if you know of any community organizations that you feel would benefit, please do tell them about the Healing Spaces program. You don't necessarily need to be a teacher to join the Healing Classrooms, but because we talk about academic success, it does make it a little bit more pertinent for them.
Sorry to interrupt you, Emily, but there's a
Yes, of
question that's
course.
actually come on the panel from Poppy, and she's asking, does Healing Classrooms actually go down as far as early years?
It does, yes. Yeah, absolutely. So I am early years trained. I was an early years teacher for 8 years and then an EAL specialist for a year. And actually, Poppy, we've just decided to do an early years specific course, which is really exciting. So that starts in October. I think there's 2 spaces left on it. So if you'd like to sign up, I would go to the website and you'll see an early years specific course. And we talk a lot about kind of the transition to from nursery to early years and how to support families who are new to daycare. So yeah, it's going to be really exciting. But all of our resources, we say they're kind of used from like 5-ish because they're games and lesson plans that we would use in the classroom all the way into secondary. But we've had further education colleagues as well who've been able to kind of tweak them to their cohort. So they're vague and they're broad enough that we're able to use them for a whole host of people. But yeah, so we can talk more about that on the training if you join. Next slide, please. I would really encourage you, the best way to kind of get the information and the resources and access to all of the games and stuff. You don't necessarily have to come on the training to have access to this stuff, but I would recommend it because we talk through it and how to use it effectively. If you do check out the International Rescue Committee Healing Classrooms website, you'll have loads of articles. There's lots of different resources that you can have a look at, and that's where you can sign up for the specific training that you would like. So there's a few sessions running in October, November, and December, and hopefully we're going to be looking at them in the new year very shortly. So there's open ones, or as I said, we can do a bespoke for the whole school if the school is looking for a specific CPD session. We love doing that as well. We find doing like a conference or an in-person event is really, really impactful because you get more people from the same school who are joining, who can talk about policy and talk about what they're doing in their schools. Next slide, please. These are some of the key resources that are available on the website, and you'll get access to them when you sign up for the training. So the handbooks, you get sent a physical copy. And as I said, they're really handy, and they kind of, when I was teaching, I would refer back to it all the time. There's lots of good activities, lots of really good case studies and resources in the handbook. But the IRC Games Bank and Lesson Bank, you can access online. And then for teachers who have specific children from Ukraine and Afghanistan, these country-specific briefings are so valuable. They talk about how the school system is run in that country and what children might be experiencing when they come to the UK, the difference between classroom settings, what's acceptable in their old schools and might be quite different for them when they come to the UK. Obviously, children who are fleeing their countries have gone through something quite traumatic, and it's how to make them feel as though they're going to be supported in their new school. So there's lots of really good information in those country-specific briefings. We've worked a lot with the Hong Kong community as well to put some information on the website about how to support our Hong Kong children who are coming. And we've also worked with our wider colleagues to support children from Sudan. So definitely check out the website. And if there's any other questions, please email. We're a really small team. There's only 4 of us. But yeah, we're all very passionate about this education. So it would be great to be able to chat this through a little bit more. Next slide, please. And then from this, you'll be able to see we have our Healing Classrooms kind of mailbox. So if you want to get in touch with the wider team, you're welcome to email. Or my my email is there as well. Yeah, and please check out the website. All of our contact information is there. You can check us out on socials. And again, I should just mention the training is free, so there's no cost associated. If it's a virtual training, people can join when suits them. And if you want something more bespoke, then we would get in contact and we would find a date that works for the school. As governors yourself, it would be amazing if you would join as well. I think that's really important and kind of a path that we haven't really looked at yet, how we can be supporting the people who support the teachers. So we would be really interested to perhaps run like a governor's bespoke session if we could organize that. But yeah, we're very flexible, very happy to kind of meet people where they are in their learning journey. So I think that is pretty much it from me. I do apologize. I need to drop off very quickly. So please email if you have any questions. Steve and Emma said they would kind of put all of the questions to me via email, and I'm happy to answer them that way.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed,
Thank you,
Emily,
Steve.
on behalf of Governors for Schools, but also all of our audience this morning. I think that was very thought-provoking. That's a fantastic project, and I think that's something that's very relevant in an awful lot of our schools. So very big thank you.
Thank you very much.
Lovely. So forgive me, folks. I'm just going to toggle the slides again for a moment. Sorry, for some reason that didn't work. Bear with me 1 second. Sorry, there's always more than one way to do this, isn't there? Profuse apologies there. Right. So a very big thank you to Emily for that input, and I hope everybody found that as interesting and thought-provoking as I did. Now on to Hot Topics, the main session of the main focus of this morning's session. Hot Topics is a session where we try to convey to you what we believe are the most important aspects of what's going on in the big wide world of education beyond the school gates. And Linda and I are here this morning from Better Governor as ever. Very warm welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us. We will, because obviously we've got a slightly shorter time slot, so we will desperately try to finish on time. But we're going to guide you through the session this morning. Session topics that we've actually picked out: a little bit about new government, new potential new direction, teachers' pay award, school attendance is a little bit of a perennial issue at the moment, but as many of you will know, we have new regulations that came into effect back in August, ready for the start of a new academic year. New version of keeping children safe in education, all about safeguarding. There have been some changes to the Ofsted framework this term, which we will also talk you through, and then a very brief word about the Academy Trust Handbook right to the very end of the session. This is your session, so please, if you have any questions, do put them on the Q&A, and we'll try and respond to those as we go along. And with no more ado, let's kick off and just start with a focus, as promised, about the new government, and obviously therefore we have a new Department for Education. Team, I'm not going to take you through all of these. I think everybody will know who Bridget Phillipson, the new Secretary of State, is. The team has different responsibilities, is not replicated the structure of the department as it was in the last government. And I think the most important thing to point out here is the woman on the top row far right, Catherine McKinnell. She is Minister of State for School Standards, and that is a very, very wide brief. And I think she is somebody that, as governors, we are probably going to be hearing most from in terms of the detail of education policy. She actually has responsibility for academies. There is no separate post. It's not listed in her remit, but she has already put her forward into the Academy Trust Handbook this year, but she has a very broad brief. You will see that Janet Davey is Minister for Children and Families. She also is someone we're going to be hearing quite a lot from because of the Children's Wellbeing Bill. I think the important thing to actually note is, of course, because we have a new government, we actually had a King's Speech latter part of July. Not a huge amount on education within that. I think the important thing to note, which potentially flags to what we might see coming up in the future, the section of the King's Speech was actually titled Education and Skills, Schools and School Food. Now, the school food bit isn't replicated in the name of the department. They haven't changed that. But I think it does indicate a direction of travel which had already been hinted at. And of course, the first pledge that was actually made in the King's Speech in terms of new government's policy was that pledge to have free breakfast clubs in every primary school in the country. Now, more detail on that will be forthcoming soon. We've been promised, but we don't know much more than that at this stage. And then there's also the pledge that the government wants to convert what they've estimated to be roughly 3,300 classrooms, which are spare, surplus to requirement in primary school settings at the moment, and they want to convert them to nursery settings, adding over 100,000 childcare places in total into schools. And that has been a major part of Labour's manifesto, of course, what they wanted to do with childcare. And we will, again, see more detailed plans coming, I believe, in the spring on that. It's actually been said very recently. Most people will probably have heard some of the debate, I think it's fair to call it, on the on the imposition rather of VAT onto private school fees. That's estimated to raise £140 million, and that will pay for a significant part of the cost towards converting those surplus classrooms. There was a little bit in the King's Speech about multi-academy trusts, nothing specifically about maintained schools, but the element on multi-academy trust was about bringing them into the inspection system, in other words, into the Ofsted system, not as individual schools with a trust, but actually broadening the inspection system out so there is a formal process where trust-wide inspections take place. And they've also talked about introducing a new annual review. And again, it's unclear at this stage whether this is solely aimed at academy trusts or whether this will go across the whole system. But annual review of safeguarding, also attendance and off-rolling. Obviously, those are key themes for continuing from the previous government. But yeah, watch this space and we will actually bring you up to speed on those as soon as we can. Question from Dawn on the panel is saying, will the slides be shared later? Yeah, they absolutely will. Matthew's asking about, do we have expectations around funding levels for free breakfast clubs? No, we don't. And I think it's a good question to ask Matthew. I was at a governing body meeting last night. One of the issues that we're talking about, there's lots of debate at the moment about providing food for these clubs. There are lots of people already providing free food. The significant impact for schools, of course, is the provision of staff, and that's also the biggest element of cost. Rosemary is actually asking about the conversion of classrooms. Is that linked to reduced birth rate? Well, inevitably it is, Rosemary. That's why those additional classrooms actually exist. So yes, absolutely. We don't know at this stage when it's actually going to come into effect, but say watch this space, and I'm sure we'll be talking about that in the future. Okay, so let's just move on to the next slide. As we always try to do, Linda and I have actually posed some questions that we think governors and trustees perhaps could take away from this particular aspect of this morning's hot topic session and ask in their schools. Firstly, because of the timing of the election in early July, because of the timing of the King's Speech in late July, are school leaders aware of the implications of the King's Speech? Have we actually discussed them at a governing body meeting? Have they been discussed at SLT? are they going to be? And of course, if you are in a primary school, yeah, do you actually have space capacity to establish a nursery setting? Is that something that would be of value to your school community? And the other element, which wasn't writ large, so to speak, in the King's speech, but actually was covered in the press release that the Department for Education put out after it, is that their plan is to introduce a curriculum review, and we'll say more about that at a later date. But part of that curriculum review is to ensure that going forward, all academy trusts must teach according to the national curriculum. That was originally one of the freedoms of the academy sector. They didn't have to comply with the national curriculum. Most do, of course. Okay, so let's move on to the second section. And as I say, I'm sorry if I'm going quite rapidly through this morning, but we're up against the clock. But please don't let that stop you asking questions. Put your questions on the panel. We'll answer as many as we can. And if we can't, we'll get back to you individually after the session electronically. So teachers' pay is the next element, and we had a press release, and you can see the date of that at the bottom in the small print. It was published on the 29th of July, right at the start of the school holiday. So yes, it's welcome news, but it just wasn't brilliant in terms of the timing. But the government has actually confirmed that they've actually accepted the school teachers review body recommendation, and all teachers in state-funded schools, which includes academies, of course, will receive 5.5% pay award. And most importantly, I think for us as governors, it is going to be fully funded, which has not happened for several years now. Question from Rosemary on the panel: does this term's pay committee still need to relate to the 23-24 cycle? So governors still need to approve teachers' pay progression this year? Yeah, absolutely. Teachers were appraised, performance managed last year against the policy that was in place in the time. So even though we're in the new academic year now, Rosemary, obviously your setting target, or your head teachers and leadership teams are setting targets, objectives for this year going forward, but the decisions made by the pay committee relate to last year. This is actually an inflationary increase for all teachers, of course, that we're talking about here. And Poppy's saying back maintain schools only, including nurseries. Any state-funded school, and if you are a maintained nursery, there's nothing I've seen in any of the documentation that says you're precluded, so I would assume that you are. Okay, so just some key facts to note from the press release that was produced by the Department for Education. First and foremost, there is a commitment, as I say, to fully fund teachers' pay, but also a commitment to fund support staff pay awards for the current fiscal year in schools 24 to 25. The importance of that is, I think we've had a situation, certainly in the last 2 years, to my certain knowledge, where support staff pay was increased, but that was not funded at all. So we don't know what the settlement is going to be yet. We won't know that until I think it's late January, early February. But whatever period that's backdated to, whatever the cost of it, the government have actually committed that they will fully fund that as well. So what this has done is brought a little bit of breathing space into school budgets, I think. As I said, the DfE have fully accepted the school teachers review body report, which actually talked about the 5.5 and recommended that. Academies still retain the freedom to set their own pay, of course, despite what we said about the national curriculum and that freedom disappearing. This freedom remains. In my experience, and I'm actually chair of an academy trust, and I'm a member in another, most academies tend to follow the pay rates, if not the conditions, in the school teachers' pay and conditions document, because it's a very competitive marketplace, and we know that retention and recruitment are big issues across the country at the moment. We're waiting for the teachers' pay and conditions document, the STPCD, as it's often referred to. That is due to be published. It's out for consultation with unions at the moment. It's due to be published anytime in the next couple of weeks. So 2 key guidance documents. I'm not necessarily recommending them as bedtime reading, certainly not the teachers' review body, but just so you know it's there, and we've given you a link for that at the end of the session as well. But also a new publication, which I do suggest that governors, particularly those on pay committees, actually look at, and that's a document called Managing Teachers and Leaders' Pay, and that talks in a lot of detail about what schools should be doing, linked to the new regime, and what's actually been said about that. And the headlines from the teachers' pay talk about the increased level. The bullet point in the middle on this slide, it's in italics because it's a quote and it's taken directly from the School Teachers Pay and Review Body, School Teachers Review Body report, I should say. And it just gives you an indication of why the review has actually recommended an above inflation increase. And I think, as I intimated in terms of talking about recruitment and retention, we know those are issues. We know there's been big drops in recruitment into the profession generally, as well as the issues in individual schools. And therefore, it is seen as a step towards perhaps repairing some of the damage that's been done in recent years. And then the important thing for us all to note is that in the same press release from the Department for Education, they have now decided that performance-related pay is no longer compulsory as of the 1st of September this year. Now, it's not compulsory. However, there is still an expectation, of course, for us as governors, but actually for our schools, that we are holding the school to account for the performance of teachers. And obviously that is about the quality of teaching. It's just not a formal legal requirement anymore. Most schools will probably still be looking at performance, and probably still should be looking at performance in terms of making those decisions about whether or not teachers move up the pay scale. And again, a few questions here that we might want to ask. Certainly, I think this is, the financial implications of this are what are going to have the greatest impact on governance. And therefore, from a budget perspective, if we're in a maintained school or even in a trust, what did we actually put in our budget this year for teachers' pay? Sorry, I've missed an apostrophe out there. I do apologise. Because it may well be we didn't put as much in, but of course it might have been we put more than that in. But the reality is the award, as it is, the 5.5 will be fully funded, and many of us will not have assumed that would have happened. So what were the assumptions that the budget was actually predicated on, and what did it include in terms of funding, I think is something also that's actually very relevant. As a consequence of that, as governors, we'd want to know if we now have unallocated funds, or perhaps a little bit of a contingency that's arisen. And if so, obviously, what will we want to perhaps do with that? And similarly, on support staff, as I say, that will be fully funded when it is. Did we put provision for that in our budget? Rachel asking, do we know anything about TA's pay? That's part of support staff, Rachel. And as I say, we're not expected to hear anything about that until probably January, February time. Okay, and at that stage, I'm going to take a breath and stop talking and hand over to Linda. Sorry, Linda, this is the first time I said good morning to you on the airways, but over to you.
Good morning, and good morning to everyone else. We're going to talk a little bit about attendance regulations now, new attendance regulations, but those of you that have joined us in the past will know that we've been talking about attendance for well over a year now, and there has been a concentrated effort in all our schools and from previous government legislation and conversation about improving attendance, particularly for those pupils that are consistently either late or not in school, because the evidence tells us that those children who are not in school are at a greater risk, both in terms of safeguarding and in terms of their education. If you're not in school consistently and on time, you are not going to be able to learn at the same rate as your peers. So we knew that there will be new attendance regulations coming, so many of you will already be aware that this was on the cards, and that we were expecting to have a new raft of things to think about this term. So we've got the new legislation, school attendance pupil registration regulations. We've also got the education information about pupils' amendments regulations, and we've also got some information about penalty notices. And the penalty notices, I think it's worth just reinforcing here that this is not something that the school is in charge of. This is legislation. The money doesn't come to schools, but the fines have now been increased, and it is part of a raft of tools that are available to the school. And now this is being emphasised as one of those things that schools should be using. So it's none of this is unexpected. You probably have had conversations in your governing bodies about some of this already, and I think many of you will be aware that this introduction of this new set of regulations also came with a lot of resources for schools to use themselves and to share with parents. So those of you that might be parent governors will have received information, but it is very likely that your schools will have circulated information to your parent community, telling them, reinforcing the message about sending their children to school regularly on time, but also telling them that the penalty notices will be increased. And this is particularly relevant for those children who take or those parents who organise term time holidays. So what has actually changed? Well, as part of this government drive, they have told us in advance that they were going to do this. There is now a requirement for all schools to submit daily attendance data to the DfE. And certainly in the first governing body meeting I had with my head on Monday of this week, we talked about, we're compliant with submitting this daily attendance data, but also what information does it generate in this attendance dashboard? The school said there's quite a lot of information there. You can cut it in different ways. And at the moment, they're trying to get to grips with how they might use it best to support the approaches that we are taking. So that dashboard is available, and schools will probably be in a similar position looking at how that works and how it can help them, both in terms of refining their way that they're working, but also what does that data do in terms of informing the bigger picture about what's working and where the areas of focus might be in the future. There is, as I say, an increase here in the fines and the penalties and a new framework in the way that works. And that's where I think it links very closely with the information that's been sent out to parents, so that parents are fully aware of what that will look like. And this links also to the new attendance codes. So there are different codes, and these relate now back to that daily submitted attendance data. So all schools will be submitting data in the same way so that it can be compared on that dashboard in a way that is helpful to share.
There's a question actually on the panel, Linda, just to interrupt you there, sorry, from Stacey. Stacey saying, am I thinking the fines for term time holidays are still at individual schools' discretion? Individual school holidays, one of the codes that said there is no holiday code anymore. Yeah. This is part of the government's tightening up. So I think that's disappeared. There is no code for that. And the implication is that actually the government are ratcheting up expectation. And the implication now is that no, if people are still, despite the fact that they're being told, no, you can't have an authorised holiday because there is no facility for doing that anymore, if they still insist on going on holiday, then the school doesn't really have any discretion. The expectation is that those penalty notices will actually be put in place.
Because there isn't another code to code it as, and if it meets those requirements for the framework of the penalty code, then I think it's almost an automatic. It's taken the decision out of the school's control. That's certainly my head teacher's understanding of it. And again, I think the important thing here, and we might want to consider that, is how much information has been shared with their parents so that they're aware of that and they can make those decisions in a fully informed way. There's a question here from Stuart about where the local authorities, what they use the money for, and if they act consistently. The school should be acting consistently under this new set of regulations. The local authority uses that money to support education. And I'm not sure, Steve, whether you're aware of whether that information is published, but I'm not aware of that at the moment.
I don't believe it is.
No. And Liam is saying, is there a case for the school getting some of the money from the fines? This is not, it's not part of the legislation, so it goes to the local authority and they use it for educational purposes. But I think that's as far as we know there. So thinking about the updated guidance, there is a guidance document that's available for schools and governors, applies to all state-funded schools, so academies as well. It reflects that the new regulations, and it updates those expectations on the school. So where there is flexibility is probably not the right word here, but where there are genuine reasons for attendance issues for pupils, there are expectations on the school that they will work closely with others within the system. So most schools will work with outside agencies in terms of education welfare or attendance officers. They may have internal expectations of staff, support staff that work across a range of different interactions with parents and families, such as the emotional learning support staff. And so considering how your schools work with families in your community individually, because often when we're thinking about consistent lateness or persistent poor attendance, we're looking at other issues that are very individual to those families and children. So physical and mental health, chaotic environments for families, disadvantage, trauma, all of these things have to be considered, and then individual approaches tailored. So you will have senior leaders, you will have possibly support staff, depending on your size of your school. And if you're in secondary particularly, there will be a working together protocol for the youth offending team, so that this becomes all part of your safeguarding approach as well as your educational offer. There's a question here from Rafiq as a university lecturer and the quality of high school leavers. What do we need to have all high school leavers equipped with digital certificates and with some finance and economics knowledge that can make a difference? So we'll come to that, because I'm going to talk a little bit about something that relates to that, Rafiq, in a little while, but I'll come back to that if I may. In terms with, Kay is asking a question about reports, and I think, again, you need to have conversations, I'll talk about that on the next slide, conversations with your school so you can understand the approaches the school is taking, and the reports that would then come to your board around both from your school as a whole. One of the questions our governors asked was, will we continue to get our focused reports on attendance that we've already designed that meet our needs as a board, or will this new attendance system generate reports that will be more helpful to us? And at the moment, that's not clear, because the school is just getting to grips with that new system. So let's think about questions that we have as a board to consider and to then think about asking. First of all, our attendance policy is likely to need updating, both to reflect the regulations, but also I would suggest that our school teams have been thinking about how they will approve attendance this year, and therefore they will build in some of those context-related issues to a new attendance policy, so that it's both compliant with the new regulations, but also strategically focused on what it is the school is doing to support better attendance in the future. So there will be a new attendance policy. It'll probably have a link to those new codes that we talked about, so that will inform your understanding of those. Has information been shared with parents and carers? What information is that? Is that helpful for you to know as a board? What's been shared? Does that inform your view about what the school is doing about attendance, and therefore the questions, the quality of the questions that you will ask? Conversations about the dashboard data. Once schools have got to grips with what that can provide, will that change what is shared with you? And then most importantly, do we know enough as a board about what our school or our trust is doing strategically to improve attendance? And then as we monitor this over the coming year, are we asking the right questions to test whether it's having that impact or not? So I think that links quite nicely, thinking about attendance, to thinking about keeping children safe. There has been an update to the Keeping Children Safe in Education for 2024. If you have been a governor for some years, you will know that this document is updated each year. There is usually a draft of it available in the late spring, and then final tweaks, and it becomes a compliance document from the beginning of September. And you can see this document came into force on the 2nd of September. There's not been huge changes to it this year. But if those of you that joined us earlier this year, you'll know that there was a couple of consultations in place, and one of these was a consultation around gathering information about what changes might happen in 2025. So we are expecting a larger set of changes to this document next year, but at the moment, the main changes this year have been to bring it into line with some other documents and some other practices. So definitions have changed. There is a sister document to this that schools use called Working Together to Safeguard Children. And this is about working collectively across the agencies. So the definitions have been updated in this document to reflect the language in the Working Together document. As part of this approach of a more positive way of working with families to support them getting their children to school more regularly on time, unexplained absence replaces deliberately missing education. So this is just a language change. It means the same thing, but it's a softer piece of language which allows those working with those families to work with them in a more positive way. And then finally, for those of you who may send children to what some of you might call short stay schools, alternative provision, these children remain on the roll of their main school, but they spend a period of time in what we call alternative provision. And whilst that alternative provision will take attendance, there is a responsibility on the governing body of those schools where those pupils are on the main roll to make sure that they understand, receive, and ask questions around attendance at that alternative provision that they are sending those pupils to. So important messages here. Don't forget that the Keeping Children Safe in Education document requires new governors to have had safeguarding training as part of their induction training. So if you are a new governor, that should be part of what you do to onboard you as a governor. The DfE talks about annual, regular training, and they mean by that term at least annually. And so what is it that your board is going to require of its members to satisfy that requirement? Is it going to be a joint session? Is it going to be an online recording or provision? What does that look like? But all governors should have an annual refresh, and they should undertake that training. So if it if that hasn't been a part of the conversation before, then this year, when you look at safeguarding at your first meeting of the year, then think about what does that mean for us as a governing body, because there is a requirement to understand what it says in part 2 of Keeping Children Safe in Education, which is about the management of safeguarding. And as a board, you can't ask sensible, reasonable and searching questions if you aren't aware of what you're holding the school to account for. So it's a really important aspect here, that it should not be operational only, it should be about that management of safeguarding in terms of the training aspect.
Can I just jump in there, Linda? Because I think I actually delivered training to one of my own governing bodies on this last night. We had a governing body meeting, and one of my fellow governors, who happens to be a staff governor, said, well, why is this different to the training that we had as a staff? And that's the key to it. As I say, it is about our governance responsibilities. And I know there's a lot of governors and trustees out there, they attend the perhaps whole staff training that took place in inset days at the start of the academic year. That's great, because I think it's a really nice insight and it's a really helpful way of actually knowing what staff need to know. But it isn't the full picture from a governance perspective. From a governance perspective, we have to know what the expectations of us are in terms of the assurance we'd be seeking from our senior leaders, designated safeguarding leads, etc.
Thanks, Steve. And I think it's important to make that distinction between the two, because sometimes schools don't understand themselves that governors have a different responsibility to the operational responsibilities covered in their Part 1 training to staff. So let's just think about questions that we should be asking. I've covered some of these already. Has your safeguarding policy been updated? It is one that is required to be updated annually. So if you have a suite of policies that all come under that safeguarding umbrella, is that on your autumn term agenda? Have all governors access training, or have they been tasked to access training? And make sure if it's a we would require of, then you go back and follow that up to make sure that it's happened. Do you routinely have a safe recruitment part of your safeguarding on your agenda? So are we clear of that we are meeting those responsibilities as an employer in terms of taking on staff? And does the board seek assurance that the filtering and monitoring systems in place are active and effective, and that they meet those requirements that were published last year? So let's move on to another aspect, and that is Ofsted. There were changes made, initial changes made to the Ofsted inspection framework from the 17th of July. There was a publication, a blog that talked about the change to the ungraded inspections as a response to that second consultation. I mentioned there were 2 consultations in place in the spring, and one of those was in response to the tragic death of the head teacher following an Ofsted inspection that you will remember was part of what we shared with you in our last spring briefing. So as a response to that, an early response to that, they've made some changes from the 17th of July to ungraded inspections. So that what we used to call Section 8 inspections, that's one where the grade of the school does not change. And so these now are going to be called ungraded inspections. And as part of this update, so it is only for those inspections that do not change the school's grade. It's important to have that in your mind in order to process the bits that I'm going to share next. In those ungraded inspections, so basically the inspection team are coming to the school with the assumption that your school remains good or outstanding, and they are going to carry out some tasks and some conversations, and they are going to test whether, in their view, the school still remains at that level. In the framework that existed before July, there was, in these ungraded inspections, they carried out something which was described as deep dives. They're not going to be doing that anymore. The new emphasis, and this is from the information itself, providing leaders with opportunities to demonstrate where they have improved and discussed where they still have work to do. So again, for those of you that have been governors for some time, this is about how well the school knows itself, what they're good at, where the data demonstrates that they are providing a good education and are performing at levels that are consistently good. And there is an emphasis on this consistency, but importantly, being able to identify those areas which need more improvement. So we may think, oh, in attendance was one of those things that we are, as a board, talking about, because that links back into areas where we still need to improve. There is now a focus on overall rather than individual. So there is a focus on grouping subjects together. And there is a comment that says about some conversations will be challenging. And for anybody who sat in front of an Ofsted inspector as a governor, being asked, where is your evidence for that? How do you know that? Those conversations can be challenging in terms of their nature, but they should be informed by what you know as a school. So some form of school self-evaluation will result in the school knowing and being able to demonstrate and evidence, we're good at this because of this evidence, we are improving this because of this evidence. And as a board, you may still see a form of self-evaluation. Certainly it comes in the form of our head teacher's report. There is a beginning section that has that focus in our particular academy trust. But importantly, as governors thinking about this term, you should know from the school improvement plan, the school development plan, which areas where there is still work to do. What are your strategic priorities, your school improvement themes for this year? And do you understand why those themes are important? So this isn't new. They've dropped the deep dives, but it's back to knowing your school, knowing what the evidence says, knowing that the monitoring is giving you information to demonstrate you've got this right, you're going in the right direction, and impact is being measured. So you've probably heard, against the background of that's the ungraded inspections. You've probably heard that there was a press release, single Ofsted grades, single headline Ofsted grades, those ones that we are used to, scrapped in a landmark school reform. It's true, but it hasn't happened yet. So it's probably not going to happen until September next year, because they've got to decide what they're going to do differently, and then they've got to write all the framework to demonstrate that. So we're probably looking at new Ofsted framework from September to 2025. But at the moment, graded inspections, Section 5 inspections, will still be ending in a single headline Ofsted grade, because it takes time to get a new framework up and running, test it, and then make sure that it actually does address the issues that were there from before. There's a question from Mohammed. What happens to the school who were recently gone through graded inspections? Well, you still have graded inspection because there are no changes. And that will stay as it is until September, probably next year. So thinking about what has changed, is your school due an ungraded inspection over the next 12 months? So be aware of what those changes are. And importantly, are your schools prepared to have those conversations about what we do well and where we're trying to improve and what the evidence is that supports that? So are leaders aware that this has been the change, and are staff prepared? Because many staff have been preparing for those deep dive kind of approaches. So what does that look like differently? And do we have that self-evaluation view? And then finally, we're going to talk about Academy Trust Handbook. And this kind of comes back to Rafiq. So sorry, I've kept you waiting quite a long time for an answer here. In the Academy Trust Handbook, there is a reminder on the digital technology standards that are set for schools. So it's a separate document, but there is a reminder about that document. And that document talks about having more efficient and better systems and learning opportunities for students. And it talks about a variety of different things, and maintenance, the procurement and the contracts, but it is part of where you would have that conversation, Rafiq. What do the standards say? What is it that your school's doing about it? And where might that be improved? So I think that's probably where you pick that question up. There's a reminder in the handbook about the financial reserves and the need for a reserves management plan. And then as part of the safeguarding approach that we all have in place, so cybersecurity isn't just for academies, of course, there is a reminder there about cybersecurity standards. So just flipping back to Ofsted, there is a question from Stacey. I think Steve probably answered that online, so I'm not going to go back to that. Let's just think about the key questions there if you are part of an academy trust. This is about the trust board. I'm focusing here rather than the local governance arrangement. So trustees answering these questions. Compliance with all of the aspects of the new Academy Trust Handbook. And as trustees, have we accessed that cybersecurity training? And making sure that you are working closely and not in violation of the agreement that you have in place. So being really clear that you have the evidence to support and you have met the deadlines in terms of that. So sorry, a bit of a rush towards the end of that. I don't know, Steve, if you want to answer any remaining questions that you might have on the board at the moment.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of the questions. Two of them I've all on the same theme, which I've actually responded to on the board. But Dawn's just asked the same question, and I think a lot of people are perhaps confused on the Ofsted overall judgments. And Dawn saying, my understanding is that single word overall judgments have been removed. They absolutely haven't. And as you may have seen on the question panel, what I said to a few other people is that unfortunately, this is down to inaccurate media coverage. Perish the thought. But that's probably the way it has been reported in the media. The reality is they have announced the scrapping of them. As Linda said, inspections are going on today, tomorrow, and for the rest of this academic year until such time as a new framework is created. And that's a very lengthy process, again, as Linda said, so it does not change. There is a blog from Ofsted which actually talks about when it doesn't talk about it, just says next year, it says 2025. We are assuming that will actually mean September because it takes such a long time. But I have a school very local to me that was actually inspected yesterday and the day before, and they know what their single word judgment is. So schools are still being judged and will continue to be judged as outstanding, good. Obviously requires improvement is not a single word, but those judgments remain because the framework for Section 5, the ongoing standard inspections, has not changed. It takes an act of Parliament to actually approve that. We've got a couple of questions on the panel about cyber security. So yes, Catherine, RPA, which is the risk protection assurance, it's an insurance type scheme that's actually run by the government. Maintained schools and academies can access it. One of the requirements this year on the the detail that was actually sent out to participating schools is that governors must undertake the cybersecurity training in order to not invalidate. So if you were to have a cyber attack on your school and it cost money to, if governors have not had the training and staff are expected to do the training as well, of course, then that could have serious implications.
And I've just noticed there's a question from Jude about the handbook that came into force on the 16th of September. The Ofsted judgments, it still uses those 4 existing words, just confirming that. Just looked it up to double check. But yes, what we've told you is accurate, and for all the reasons we've already described.
Okay, well, I think we've just tipped past 9 o'clock, folks. So any questions that remain on the panel, we will answer. We'll get back to you electronically, hopefully later in the day with responses on those. But thank you very much indeed for all of those questions this morning. We've got a lot of people on the session, which is always good. But just to say, from Linda and I, thank you very much for joining the session this morning. Do come back next time. We've got more sessions planned to deliver on behalf of Governors for Schools later in the term. It has actually stopped raining finally here now. It's been a really wet night, but hopefully it's better where you are. Please enjoy the remainder of your day, and we look forward to seeing you again in the not too distant future. Many thanks indeed, and goodbye.
Goodbye.